So real quick, this is going to be a special video because this is a subject that means a lot to me. But uh, you'll see that the topic of this video and what I've found, and then the videos I found to talk about this and to show this information for you to go and research. Anything I put, I want you to go and research. Don't take my word for it. Go look for yourself. Um, this book, Why Meadow Died, by Andrew Pollock and Max Eden. It's about the Parkland shooter and how his daughter, I think it's Andrew Pollock, his daughter was shot in that shooting, and he wrote a book because he investigated the policies and some of the things that led to her daughter dying. And the first thing that comes to his mind is not gun control. First thing, there are a lot of other mistakes that were made that led to, I mean, lots of their deaths, and not just this shooting, and other shootings, and other incidents that could have avoided this. So please watch the video to the end, and this is how social justice ruins our kids and hurts their safety. Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, actually. In 2016, the Washington Post editorial board described the District of Columbia Public Schools, DCPS, as the fastest improving urban school district in the country. Philanthropic foundations have invested heavily in the district and deemed it the flagship of the education reform movement, which insisted that schools should be ran more like businesses. The idea was that if school administrators were given expertly designed management systems that stressed improving bottom line student outcomes such as test scores, suspensions, and graduation rates, struggling schools would see transformational improvement. This idea gained substantial bipartisan support, but was derided by some progressive critics as the corporate reform agenda. These critics lamented that billionaires were propping up advocacy organizations to push an agenda that undercut teachers and sacrificed substantive education in favor of artificially inflated or deflated metrics. But according to the Post's editorial board and the activist groups, the numbers at DCPS were unassailable. Test scores had increased, suspensions had plummeted, and graduation rates had soared. There was only one problem. The numbers were not real. In 2017, I discovered that the test score gains were essentially a product of gentrification. A local NPR reporter found that the graduation rate increased at one school was entirely attributed to fraud. Following her explosive reporting, a third-party review concluded that principals across the district had propped standards so low that students no longer needed to attend school in order to graduate. 2/3 of DCPS students who missed more than half of their senior year graduated anyway.
Okay, high school in Patterson, where you taught.
Correct.
The entire 27 years.
The entire time.
You talk about student absences that go on in that high school all the time and kids cutting class. Tell me what you mean.
The attendance is absolutely horrible. There's a 20-day attendance policy. It doesn't mean a thing. Kids don't have to show up for class. They cut. I'll have kids with maybe 30, 40, 50, 60 days of absence, maybe another 20 or 30 days of cuts, and sometimes they're even suspended. So when it comes time to the end of the year, I fail them, and then I'm asked, what can we do about passing them? I said, how can you pass them? They weren't here.
Right. This document you handed me said you counted up all the absences and the cuts.
Correct.
And what you're telling us in this document is that on average, the average kid was absent 21 days and then cut, which means they were in school but not in your class.
Correct.
Another 12 days.
At least.
Meaning over 33 days was the average, not either absent or cut out of your class, that a kid was registered to be in a school, registered to be in your class, and not there, on average 33 days.
That's absolutely correct.
What does administration say about this? You presented this to them.
I send them documentation every marking period, just like the documentation I gave you. So they have it every marking period, what's going on. It's just overlooked. They could care less. Because I know at the end of the year, they will still graduate, especially if they were a senior.
Is this 1 year an exception in your 27-year
No.
history? You give an example of kids who aren't in your class, they don't show up to take the test, and administration says they're in a different class. Explain that story.
I had a senior, absolutely did nothing. The guidance counselor came up to me and asked me, what can we do to have this kid pass? And I just said, I won't. I finally gave in, and I said he has to come in for the next 2 weeks early, and I will give him work, and he has to make up all his time. And then the next day, he doesn't show up. So the following day, my supervisor will come to see me, and he goes, well, what can we do to pass? I said, nothing. I said, he's got all these days out. I made a deal with his guidance counselor. He didn't do that, absolutely nothing. Then it turns out, I find out that they pulled him out of my class. They made some sort of arrangements with scheduling, saying that he's no longer in my class, and now he's in art appreciation. There is no such class. And then, being that he's in that class, he passed.
You're saying they invented a class just to give this kid credits?
Yeah.
One researcher calculated that if DCPS had followed its official policies last year's record, 73% graduation rate would have been closer to 48%.
So they could, and why are they doing all this?
To keep the numbers up, to say, look, we always had a very low graduation rate. Like I said, especially with seniors, so they want the numbers to go up. We're usually around 300, maybe a little over 300. They just want those numbers to go up. It has nothing to do with education or kids being in school or being responsible to be in class.
And as the Post eventually uncovered, the decrease in suspension was also entirely fraudulent. Principals had simply stopped reporting suspensions to the district office rather than following the formal process. They sent around emails to teachers telling them not to allow certain students into the building. The pressure to improve statistical outcomes did lead to better numbers, but at a tremendous cost to students.
To teach, and you'll see groups of kids just enter the classroom intent on beating a particular kid up.
Right.
And what are you supposed to do? What does administration tell you to do?
First of all, the union always tells us not to get involved, because if we get hurt, we may be liable. Or if we try to break it up and a kid gets hurt, then we're definitely liable. We have to call security. And then that sometimes takes a while for security to get there. And
the kids know it'll take a while for security to get there.
And bottom line, it'll be hushed up. Nobody will even get suspended. They'll bring them to security office. Maybe they'll get yelled at, or maybe they'll get a detention. And even with detention, they don't even show up for that. Because they want to keep all numbers down. Violence. They just hush all this stuff up. They don't want a paper trail of what's really going on inside the building and outside the building.
One example of hushing someone up you give is students having sex in a stairwell in the high school.
And this one kid,
What happened?
I think this one kid happened to be a repeating or several time repeating 10th or 9th grader, and never. This kid was always in trouble, always giving me a bad time, giving other teachers a bad time, and he was in the hallway constantly all year, never seen him in class, and because of this situation, I don't know what deals were made. I don't know if he even went to court, if he was ever arrested, but finally, because of that, he was removed from school.
But it was hushed up.
It was hushed up.
You give an example of a teacher calling security because a bunch of kids are outside his room pitching quarters and making noise, disrupting class. What happened?
Teacher got a hold of security. Security came in and goes, what can I do? I'll bring the kids to the office. Administration will say, let them loose, and they'll go right back to doing the same thing.
A survey of DCPS teachers found that principals use the district's national famous data-driven evaluation system to coerce teachers to ignore bad behavior and pass students no matter what. It was a systematic con job from the top down. The most amazing thing was that when these misdeeds came to light, no one who had promoted these policies seemed to care. After the news broke, the DCPS graduate rate increase was entirely fraudulent. The CEO of Teach Plus continued to laud the district's graduation rate as proof of the success of the movement. Months after it came out that DCPS had lowered suspensions by refusing to record them, the Center for American Progress invited DCPS's chief of equity to an event to highlight the district's success in lowering suspensions.
That was never tested. And when there were all these wonderful retrospectives held down in Texas and other places about this, the first order of business is to evade the criterion that they themselves set up when they set this out. And so no matter what happens, if it's a failure by the original criterion, then we just find another criterion by which it will be a success.
Well, let's...
Watching the flagship of the education reform movement sink and no one seeming to care made a profound impression on me. I realized that in this new era of corporate education policy, the only stakeholders who mattered were the outside activist groups. There were two ways to make a reputation within this billionaire-funded progressive bubble: fake the numbers or compete for the status of most woke at education reform conferences.
Be in class.
Choice Media requested an interview with Patterson Superintendent Donnie Evans to respond to these charges. While his office did not reject our invitation explicitly, they did say they would not have time for an interview until at least 2015. Also of note, an article last month in the Patterson Press newspaper said that Evans received a $10,750 bonus that was based on increased high school graduation rates in the Patterson district. So you showed me a school calendar, and at the end of the year, it has a final exam.
Well,